Hello, welcome to the Wild and Scenic Film Festival. This workshop series is called Never Rest, a conversation with Abbie Dillen, president of Earthjustice. It's my pleasure to welcome Executive Director of the South Yuba River Citizens League, Melinda Booth, and Abbie Dillen, president of Earthjustice. Without further ado, Melinda, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And yep, I'm Melinda Booth, and I am the Executive Director of the South Yuba River Citizens League, affectionately called Circle. And Circle is the proud producer of the Wild and Scenic Film Festival. So I'd really like to extend a warm welcome to you for this 19th annual event and our first virtual edition. And I'm very thrilled to be here this afternoon to introduce you to a very special guest with us, Abbie Dillen. As you heard, Abbie leads Earthjustice, which is a national legal nonprofit fighting for your right to a healthy environment. Welcome, Abbie, and thank you so much for being here. And I'm hoping you might kick it off and tell us just a little bit more about Earthjustice for those less familiar with the organization.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Melinda, and hello to everybody out there. It's wonderful that people are tuning in virtually. It's an honor to be with all of you virtually. Earthjustice is a nonprofit, public interest environmental law firm, the biggest of its kind and the first of its kind in the world. Our tagline is because the earth needs a good lawyer, and that's never been more true than it is today. We represent all of our clients for free. We have 14 offices around the country as well as an international program, and we work on everything from lands, wildlife, and oceans to climate and energy to healthy communities.
Wow, well, we're really excited because we have, not only do we get to have this conversation and bring some thoughts and ideas to this audience, but we have a whole hour to do it. And I've got a set of some prepared questions, and we'll hopefully have an opportunity to engage with audience questions as well after a few that I kick it off with. But that's just a really nice amount of time for us to have a little bit more in-depth conversation. So just to set the stage for everybody, that's the plan. And we'll just take our time and hopefully learn some new things and dive into some pretty important topics in today's world. So let's dive in. One of the attributes that I really value most about Earthjustice, I think, is what I call accountability, right? You doggedly hold our government accountable. And the title of this workshop, Never Rest, is really emblematic of that proclivity to me. And so over the past 4 years, no one has sued the Trump administration more than Earthjustice. And now we find ourselves on the eve of a new administration, one that should be more friendly to the environment. What are the most important things that you hope the Biden administration is going to tackle first?
Great question. Let me say that over the last 4 years, we've seen not only an unbelievable number of damaging actions that have really devastating consequences for people and places all around the country, but we've seen an unprecedented effort to dismantle all the laws that really are the framework for protecting our health, our environment, and from worker protection to clean air, clean water, endangered species. The effort to really gut the regulations that give our laws teeth in daily life. And also, we've seen a raft of appointments of extremely conservative judges. And part of the litmus test was their view on the role of government in providing protection and allowing folks like Circle to get into the courts, what we think of as access to justice. And so we've seen the composition of the federal courts change really significantly over the last 4 years. And so at the very top of the list for the Biden administration and for the Congress, particularly in the wake of the Georgia election, is to balance the courts. And we can't undo judicial appointments, but we can make sure that new judges are ones that are educated about the environment, administrative law, and understand the role of government in guaranteeing what I think most Americans, no matter what their political views are, expect: healthy water, safe air to breathe. So that's number one. And I say it not because there aren't things as important, but because we've learned in the past that failure to attend to this from the very outset of the administration can leave, you have to get right on it. And that was the lesson of the Obama years. And then there's, let me just say, for those who haven't been following this, the Biden-Harris climate plan and their environmental justice plan were the most, by far, progressive, ambitious of any presidential candidate. And certainly it is historic that they won on the Build Back Better platform, which centers climate and justice as the solutions to recover from COVID and put our country back on track. And that's historic, to run and win on a climate platform. And I can tell you that Earthjustice has worked very closely with environmental groups around the country to create shared, aligned priorities for the Biden team, and to put some flesh on the bones of the really extraordinary plans that the Biden-Harris team put forward. How they can do that from day one, particularly when they walk into agencies that have been really gutted over the last 4 years. And we've just had such an extraordinary, it's just extraordinary to see who the cabinet picks are, the team that's being assembled. And, it feels like we're ready as advocates on our side to support the Biden administration and push them. That's our job too. Political will, resources always run short to do what's necessary. And so we're going to play that watchdog, never resting accountability role in this administration like any other. We're going to do it from day one. Thankfully, we have a lot of litigation teed up that will immediately put not only the moral and policy imperative to act, but a legal court-ordered deadline to act. And so we're looking forward to getting to work. And we would like to see on day one executive orders that require every agency to make its climate plan. You will hear the team talking about an all-of-government approach. That's exactly right. Similarly, we want to see environmental justice as a lens and a driver in every agency as they're building back. We need to bring back some of our most important bedrock laws: the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, have all seen really tough regulatory rollbacks. And so righting all of those wrongs. And then there are some places that are in the crosshairs right now. The Arctic Refuge, those leases can be withdrawn. A seismic exploration can be taken right off the table. We can put back in place the moratoriums on oil and gas drilling and on coal leasing across the country. We can protect Bears Ears. So the list is long, but the great thing about the federal government is you have a whole lot of people and a whole lot of agencies who can pay attention to all of the big things that we read in the newspaper and some of the things that go more under the radar but have big consequences for all of us.
Wow. Well, it's really good to hear your the hopeful words. I feel when I listen to you talk, I'm hopeful, and there's not a whole lot of that these days, right? There's a lot of doom and gloom, and I think it really is important to remain hopeful. So thanks for that. And there's a theme and a couple of the questions coming up soon that talk a little bit about that, but it's nice to hear it live too. And thank you to Earthjustice and obviously others for your contributions to the Biden-Harris climate platform and working with them on creating such a strong platform. And I don't know if you know this, but at our film festival every year, because this is an environmental film festival put on by an environmental conservation group, we use this as a platform for our action, actually. And so we have an action happening this year. So shameless plug for our work, but if folks are interested, they can go to yubaaction.org and check it out. But it's a letter that we're sending to the Biden-Harris administration thanking them for being for their pledge to be strong climate leaders and encouraging them to follow through and suggesting a few things that they can do that would be really beneficial here, especially in California, because in California, one of the ways that we see it as a climate crisis is a water crisis. So that's a lens that we're bringing to this festival as well. So if folks are interested, maybe after this chat, go check out yubaaction.org. But I think if it sounds good, maybe we'll shift gears just a tiny bit into the next question. And so Earthjustice is a signatory to the Equitable and Just Climate Platform, which advances the goals of economic, racial, climate, and environmental justice to improve the public health and well-being of all communities while tackling the climate crisis. How is Earthjustice approaching this challenge to center justice and equity at the forefront of these solutions?
Sure, and let me just step back for a second about the why. For anyone who's been following climate policy and efforts to get a handle on the climate crisis, work has been ongoing for decades now, and understandably, the focus has been on greenhouse gases and how to cut emissions. And whether you have been following work at the international level or here in the US or even at the state level, the conversation has been very much about the GHGs. And even though people know that what it will take to decarbonize our economy will be enormous social change with huge consequences for people. And my view, and I'm certainly not original or alone in thinking this, is that we can't just think about this in terms of numbers and markets. This is a social change problem on a scale that we have never dealt with as a species, certainly as a country. And so we have an opportunity and an imperative to change our country for the better as we completely change the way we make and use energy, as we change the way we grow and transport our food, as we change really every aspect of our society. And for too long, I think the conversation has been divorced from the problems in our society that are in fact drivers of an environmental harm, racial injustice. You know, where do we see the worst fossil fuel production with the worst emissions that are killing people in real time as we fill the atmosphere and preclude a safe future for us at this point as well as our kids? That's happening in neighborhoods that are predominantly people of color living in them. The way that the sort of worst poisons, whether from a climate standpoint or a clean air and water standpoint, are allowed to proliferate are in communities that are not treated equally in this country. And so not only do we have a chance to rebuild and build better, and it won't happen. It won't happen on its own unless you are absolutely centering equity and justice in the policies. But we have to understand that we're not going to get to climate solutions without dealing with these systemic inequities that allow environmental harm to flourish. And so that's the concept of the table. It's just an incredible place to be. Environmental justice leaders who have been saying this for 50 years now, and who have been advancing, I think, some of the most exciting work in community. Circle knows all about that. And uniting with some of the most well-resourced national groups like Legal Conservation Voters, Sierra Club, NRDC, Earthjustice, Union of Concerned Science, and coming together to try to work out some of those asymmetry of resources and hold ourselves accountable as big groups with lots of relative power and resources to actually fall in with this incredible leadership and advance a different vision for how we can solve climate in the US. And, if lest there were any doubt, everyone who lived through 2020, I think is understanding that whether we're talking about our democracy or our health or our reckoning around racial justice, these things are interrelated. And climate solutions can be the engine for solving other things too. And the failure to work on all of them, I think, will leave all of these crises unsolved. So that's what the table's all about. And the dream of the table was actually to influence the platform of the in the Democratic primaries. And we feel really great that we see the platform reflected in the Build Back Better vision. And it's one that I think has it doesn't purport to have as many policies across the economy as the Green New Deal does, but it's very complementary to that thinking as well, that it's time to rebuild our country, putting the climate crisis at the center to keep us on deadlines that are existential, unfortunately.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that before, and I really like how you kind of reframed climate change as an opportunity. Right? It's here whether we clearly don't want it to be here, but it's here and we have to deal with it. So let's use it as an opportunity to not only change practices that got us into that particular disaster, but to change other disasters, if you will, in better ways. To change other things from our past for the better. And so just use it as that opportunity and reframe that. That's really helpful. And that's one of those ways that how you come across is so hopeful, which I already said I really appreciate. It's a neat way to think about it. And I agree, we're here, we're now. And, we've sort of been on this precipice for a while, and we're going to go over the edge at some point, but hopefully we're not there, and we can still turn the ship around. One of the other things I'll mention too, since this is predominantly a film festival, is we do have a number of different films that talk about environmental justice issues. And so one in particular I can think of that folks might like that really directly applies to what you were just talking about is called District 15. I don't know if you've had a chance to see that, but it's about resource extraction in the middle of a neighborhood, and a neighborhood of color in the Los Angeles area. And so I think folks might really enjoy checking that out if they're enjoying our conversation. But again, just maybe shifting gears just a little bit, let's talk about biodiversity. So biodiversity is an area we really haven't touched on, and the climate crisis is manifesting through the web of life, of course. How do you see the crisis as an interconnected issue that we must urgently deal with?
Well, I couldn't be more glad that you raised it. If I could wave, well, I don't know. I hope that I would be given more than one wish at this time of so many crises. But if I were given one wish or one wave of a wand, I would have the alarm that we're hearing from scientists who work on conservation biology to be heard. At some point, the fact that 1,000 or more scientists were agreeing that climate change was human caused, that we had a carbon budget, that we were blowing it, that catastrophic consequences would follow, was heard. And even though we continue to have a toxic debate about climate in this country, in most of the world, the science is accepted. And now again, I think the election proves that we are listening to the alarm and we're getting serious about it, however belatedly. The same is true with respect to our whole web of life. And so you may hear people talking about the sixth extinction, the Anthropocene, the crises that we're seeing for not only species going over the brink of extinction, which 1 million species are now threatened with extinction, but massive reductions in wildlife that, in my lifetime, we've seen just populations crashing, even if they aren't about to go extinct. The abundance of our world, from pollinators to amazing, umbrella species, all in trouble, birds, etc. And you know, some of the most high profile beloved figures like David Attenborough and Jane Goodall are saying it, but thousands of scientists are now saying, if you read journals like Nature, the headlines are kind of wild to hear from scientists who are generally a conservative, understated bunch. And we need to hear this call. I think for those who are listening, sometimes there can be the sense that this is really just a piece of climate change. Climate change is making this worse, but what it really is a problem of over extraction. We're just not living in right relationship with our planet as people, and we are extracting to the point where we're not leaving room for any of the other species, including those that most directly support human prosperity and existence. And so I've come to use the word web of life because I think there's such a human tendency to separate ourselves from the rest of the natural world. And of course, we have to situate it right. We have to recognize the truth that we're in it. We are influencing it tremendously, but we cannot survive in a world that doesn't have healthy ecosystems. And so it is very inconvenient to have another existential crisis that is, of course, deeply intertwined with climate. But we can't let that inconvenience distract us from the truth and the scale of change that's needed to put our working lands into sustainable use, to protect what we have now, and to protect much more, including private lands and active fisheries. It's a big project, and we've got a decade to get really serious about it.
What you're talking about really resonates strongly with me and with the work that we do at Circle. And we've been having to shift our thinking in the last 10 years, let's say. And it's okay, now it's about adaptation and resilience is how we're thinking about it within our watershed, right? We can't reverse, we can't fix on the scale we're talking about before we're going to see catastrophic destruction. So again, I'm going to let you be hopeful. I'm going to be a little bit of doom and gloom right here, but we'll just turn it back around, I promise. But yeah, so we're thinking about adaptation and resilience because our mission is to unite the community to protect and restore the Yuba River watershed. Well, you can't have a healthy watershed if you don't have a healthy river, if you don't have healthy forests, right? And that is connected in my mind to that web of life that you're talking, right? Everything's connected, and we humans are so short-sighted. And like you were saying, we're destroying the very things that actually sustain us. And until we can address that, we're gonna be in a world of hurt. And I'm hopeful that we can. And I've seen it happen. And there's so much technology and innovation that can be really used for good, that if we can just get our heads out of the sand and make that change. And you're right, there's going to be social sacrifice. Like, we're not going to be able to recover from where we are without actually fundamentally changing sort of the social structure in a lot of ways. I totally agree with that. And that's hard, right? Humans are really creatures of habit. We've got to get out of our comfort zone and make those hard calls and step up. And there's a lot of folks who are. And I'm really hopeful, based on this last election too, that more and more people are seeing it and are going to be there and ready to make, I hate to say sacrifice because it doesn't necessarily have to be sacrifice, but ready to make that change.
Yeah, I think people experience change as loss in some ways, but I think we can also recognize that the way that we're living now, the people are sick, people are struggling with addiction. We've got plenty of problems. There are ways to imagine living better. And I have the wonderful luxury of working and having an ability to make change. The law is a very powerful tool. Mm-hmm. And so it gives me a sense of energy. I can't say that I am just hopeful. I see pathways for change, and I see a much more powerful movement growing for the kind of transformative change we need. But I'm clear-eyed too about the scale of the threats. And when I think about biodiversity, I think about the US in the late 60s, and what really got to the American consciousness to the point where we were able to really upend some ingrained ideas about what polluting industries should be allowed to do. And we passed the strongest laws in the world to protect the environment. And Rachel Carson's book was one of the pieces that really broke through. And it's amazing to work at the community level with environmental justice leaders, people who are really working in a deep way in place are not seeing these problems as separate. They're working holistically because they're sensitive to the environment that we're in. And so my hope is that we can wake up in a real way to the whole problem, and see that kind of awareness that was abroad when I was born in 1972 return, and that we can bring some new energy to changing the way we do things. It's the great thing is that there has been so much work on many of the solutions that's been underway. We're at the point where clean energy, it has scaled and is affordable. Even 10 years ago, that seemed impossible. We're at a time where you're starting to see really interesting things come into the Farm Bill, ways of restoring soil and using it differently. They're just, the solutions are out there. And so I'm not always hopeful that we'll avail of ourselves of them, but I gain courage from the fact that there are so many millions of people around the world who are awake to this and working on it.
Well, that's a good way to state it. And I will say a perfect segue to what I was hoping that we might talk about next. So I'm sure this will not translate at home, but here we go. All we can save: truth, courage, and solutions for the climate crisis. I'd love to chat a little bit about this book and about your contribution to this book. So you're a contributor, and this book highlights the perspectives of women leaders in the climate movement. And I think it really touches on what you were just talking about all the different ways that we have to awaken in order to see this more comprehensive change. And so I'd love to just talk about it a little bit. So what an inspiring concept. I dove into the book, and from what I've had the opportunity to read so far, including your contribution, this book is really hitting the mark. And what it's doing for me that's incredible, it's reinvigorating me in my work here within the Yuba watershed. And I want to thank you and all the other contributors for that, because this can be really lonely work sometimes, and things can go on for a really long time, and you question how much of a difference is what I'm doing making? Is this worth it? You feel like sometimes you're banging your head against the wall. And I think especially after 2020 and being so isolated and so alone, that sense has been elevated for me, and I'm sure for lots of others. And one of the ways in the past that I've addressed that is through professional conferences and gatherings with colleagues, where we can come together in person and have good conversations and realize, oh my gosh, okay, I'm not alone. There's lots and lots of other people out there working towards similar goals, and if we all keep going, we're gonna get there. And that was really missing for me in 2020, and for all of us, really. And so when I sat down and started reading this book, I said, oh, my heart just lifted, and it reinvigorated me, is all I can say. So I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about your decision to participate in this book, what it was like to collaborate with such an incredible group of female leaders.
Well, let me just say, I'm so glad that you're enjoying the book. I felt like in a particularly dark period of COVID, reading through these, I'm forgetting how many there are, 60 short essays and beautiful poems, it gave me this sense of community that I was missing. And so I'm so wonderful to hear you say it's having that salutary effect in your life too. This book, I just want to call, just put the names and lights of Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who some of you may have seen her work. She has a terrific podcast. She's an oceans climate expert and just a completely Renaissance woman, as is Catherine Wilkinson, who co-authored Drawdown. They conceived this book and they put it together in such a whirlwind amount of time. I got an email. I think they had reached out to Marianne Head of the Sierra Club, who runs the Beyond Coal campaign, and I think she gave them my name. And we had a brief chat on the phone. It felt like kismet. They said, listen, Penguin Random House has agreed to pull together this anthology. Could you get us an essay by February something? And it was like a week and a half or 2 weeks away. I was like, okay. It was that funny beginning of the year time where you forget that your life is impossible. And I was like, yes, I've got a little time, I'll do it. And it was, but I didn't even understand how wonderful the project was until the galleys came together. And the hope that Ayanna and Catherine had was to bring together a community of women beyond just the product of the book, but to, they are practitioners of shine theory like I've never seen before. And we had some meetings and a book launch virtually. And I will say I suddenly feel connected to this incredible group of women, both from their deeply felt and deeply observed essays. It's funny, it's like it's different than a book of writers. It's reading a book of change makers' idea about how change happens, often in very personal terms, distilled into a few pages for each one. So it's like being transported into the minds of so many people who've been able to make change where they are through very many different disciplines. And so it's just been I can't believe my good fortune to be included in this community in the shape of a book.
Well, it's really neat, and each essay or piece, because it's not all essays. There's poetry. There's all kinds of different pieces, but they all pack a real punch. There's a whole lot packed into them. I mean, it's the kind of book that takes me 3 times longer to read than a novel, because I'm hanging on every word. I'm trying to digest it, and I'm madly highlighting and saying, oh my gosh, yeah, it's really resonating. And I know that's going to be the case for so many others out there. So I'm going to give it this is a personal plug for me. This was not prearranged. I really hope that people, here it is again, All We Can Save, check it out. I think that it has a whole lot to offer, and I'm glad that I was introduced to this work. And I do want to keep talking about it here for a minute. So I want to read a small excerpt from your essay in the book that starts to address white privilege and climate change in a way that breaks it down that I rarely see. So here we go. I see white privilege driving both climate denial and the political apathy and disengagement that enable it. Unsurprisingly, support for climate action correlates with the perception of climate risk as well as egalitarian values. White people, and especially white men, perceive the risk least. For many people who have been comfortable until now, it's seemingly impossible to accept that anything so disruptive as climate change is even possible. Either it's a hoax or things will somehow continue to be fine. It's a profound kind of entitlement to believe, despite all evidence to the contrary, that we can go on living as we are. I'm just gonna pause for 1 sec, let that sit with the audience. It's a lot to take in. But you go on to state that you don't exempt yourself from that critique, but that the struggle is very welcome to latecomers. And so I admit that I'm in that same boat, and I found that same thing, and I'm very grateful, is that just because we haven't been there from the very, very beginning, we're not shunned. We're welcome to help make that change. But I hoped you might elaborate a little bit for our audience ways in they can learn more about that concept and get involved if so inclined?
Sure. You know, and let me just say in the book that there are plenty of footnotes and references, and um, I wasn't stating an opinion. I was relying on research that Yale and others have done over the years, really breaking down attitudes toward the environment and toward climate in particular, across race, across gender, across other demographics. And the data over and over again, there are many. I was sweating that paragraph because I knew it would be read and I wanted it to be correct. And so I wanted to see how much work had been done to really see if this was true. And it's just astonishing. Poll after poll, study after study shows this. And it's, I think it's been counterintuitive to some mainstream groups who've been predominantly white and who perceive their base as being predominantly white, to recognize that in fact the strongest base of support for environmental protection is not. And so I just pause on that because so many people are actually surprised to learn that. And when you combine that understanding with the understanding of who bears the burden of environmental harms, it makes a lot of sense. And then when you really are willing to look at the ugliness of this country, which has been vividly before us, and accept who we really are. This is who we are, a country that has deeply entrenched racism. Then I think you start understanding what's driving our problems, including our environmental problems. And another point I touch on in the essays is around how we define the environment. For most of my life, it's sort of this boutique issue, as if the environment could exist separately from our social systems and values. And I think climate change and now the biodiversity crisis are kind of pulling us into the reality that the environment is a product of decisions that we make. It's a product of miseducation. It's a product of profits over pollution, pollution and profits over people. It's a collection of decisions about how we run every sector or discipline of our society. And for me, when I say, I went to, elite, historically white institutions that had a really white worldview, and to be, middle-aged and really understanding this profoundly for the first time in my life in the last 10 to 15 years, I feel some shame around that, of course, and guilt, and I think many white people do, and to recognize that kind of discomfort is just luxurious if you're not going to act on it, and that there is a place for anyone who wants to make change. Mm-hmm. And my experience has been, if you can find the way in that speaks to your skills and your strengths, and you are clear about where you want to make change, you will find the community of people who want to welcome you and who you will want to be with to do that. And I just have met too many people who are like, well, I could never be an activist, or I'm not a lawyer, so what can I do? And I really think it's about clarity and will, because once you know what you want, you'll find your way. Can I just show one drawing from All We Can Save, which I think kind of speaks to like if we pull out of this as a species, as a planet, as a country, okay. I love this drawing that Madeline Jubilee Sato did. She did just fantastic, what she calls climate cartoons throughout this book, All We Can Save. And I'm gonna show this. It's like, it'll just give you a sense of the vibe, but I'll read it. She has 4 panels, and this is what they collectively say. Can you imagine the community that will heal the climate crisis? It will not just be you. It will not be a technological salvation. It will be all of us.
I love that. That sums it up. And I also love there's a place for anyone who wants to make change. I'm going to carry that one with me. Okay, it's choose your own adventure time. I have a couple more prepared questions, but we have had a question or two come in from the public. Do you want to move on with just one or two more sort of curated questions and then open it up, or you could dive in right now with the audience?
We can dive into it. Your prerogative. I'm good with whatever you choose.
I think this one fits. Let's dive in with an audience question and then I'll circle back. But so here's a question. It says, it appears that one thing you both share is an incredible drive to continue your work despite repeated frustrations and endless barriers. Can Abbie share an experience where long-term goals overcame short-term losses? What practice do either of you rely on when you doubt your efforts?
Oh, it's such a good question. It is the question. Well, I feel so fortunate that I've spent my professional life at Earthjustice. I'm entering my 21st year with the organization, and litigation is, there's a saying that no battle is ever won permanently. And so whether it's places in the world like the Tongass forests or the Arctic Refuge or the San Pedro River or all the roadless lands that are left across the United States. I started out in life, I ended up doing a lot of climate work for the last 10 years, but I started out as a public lands and wildlife lawyer. And it was just in Bozeman, Montana. And that is a place where there's so much that just captures the imagination of anyone who's there that they want to save it. Mm-hmm. But notwithstanding that, there's always the next threat. There's always the next mine that's proposed. There's always the next, idea of hazing buffalo or shooting wolves or, destroying grizzly bear habitat. Like it's, you would think that this iconic place in the world would be the one place where you could just call it good and say, can we please just save this last great place? And it's not like that. And over the last, it's a place I know well. I've walked over so many of the acres of it and up and down the mountains and feel a lot of personal attachment to it. And there's something so concrete about having, dear friends who've litigated, I've litigated myself, all to protect all of these places that are constantly under siege. And that, 4 years after, I thought the 2 terms of George W. Bush marked the lowest possible mark. But we could get worse, and it did in this last 4 years. And I remember thinking on the night of the 2016 election and the days following, about all that we stood to lose forever. And as resilient as nature is, there are some places like the Caribou Cowling grounds of you just can't go there and leave it undestroyed, as the Gwich'in know best. And so thinking about all the things that would be could be harmed irreparably, which is a legal term. And it's just astonishing to me that we came out of this with the sacred places intact, with so many lawsuits won. 82% of our lawsuits, they got at the end, and they're still, I can't even give you the number of lawsuits we filed right now because it's in flux, but it's over 160. Wow. But there's a lot of damage to repair, and I can't overstate that. But on the ground, we did not lose so many precious things. And we've had irreparable harm to people. I mean, I think about the border policy, so I don't want to gloss over the harm of the last 4 years and how enduring it will be, but it is just amazing what still stands unharmed, healthy, lighting the way to where we will go in the future. And it's that keeps me doing this. You know, we can touch and feel and see the product of our work. And as much as we can look at and see the sort of rapacious, relentless human tendency to destroy things, I get to work with clients around the country, just amazing people who will spend their lives fighting that tendency and who represent another human capability. And so that's just, I'm very lucky.
Well, thanks. Thanks for that. This is a little trite, but one thing that came to mind too when you were talking is, you know, 2 steps forward and 1 step back is still 1 step forward. So that's something that I just sort of remind myself on occasion.
Yeah. I also just one thing, I mean, you know, change is it just doesn't happen in a stepwise way.
Right.
And so you can just feel like you're like beating your head against this immovable wall. And then one day the wall is no longer there. And that's how it happens. And so, you know, if you had asked me, I led our work at Earthjustice to stop construction of a whole new generation of new coal-fired power plants, which would have been, you know, sort of game over in terms of the U.S. turning its contributions to climate change around, and then trying to shut down this dirty old fleet that's just been killing people for years because it's never been sufficiently controlled. And when we started that, it just seemed impossible. You know, I would go speak to groups of investors and so forth, and they're like, "Are you aware that we get more than half of our power from coal? And it is the key to American prosperity because coal is cheap." It just seemed impossible that we would now be at this place that we are in 2021, where I think most people, no matter what their environmental views are, accept that coal is in a structural decline and we won't be burning coal even 10 years from now. I think less than 10 years from now, but
yeah, that's great. Well, shifting just a little bit, I think you know this, but Circle and Earthjustice are both working on an issue that's related to the recent undermining of the Clean Water Act. We talked about that in the beginning of this conversation a little bit, but and environmental bedrock laws across the board, really. But the recent undermining of the Clean Water Act Section 401 in particular here, which are water quality certifications. And this is a critical part of the Clean Water Act that allows states to protect their waterways from infrastructure projects such as pipelines and hydropower dams. And in 2020, the Trump administration really quietly rolled back the Clean Water Act to make it easier for hydropower facilities to skirt environmental accountability through their relicensing process. So now states like California won't be allowed to protect their own watersheds. And the Yuba River watershed is the first in line to be sacrificed. And we couldn't let that happen without speaking up. And that ties back into what you were just talking about a little bit. And one of the valuable aspects of Circle that we hold is that we're an organization here in this community at the ready, right? And so you need that across the board. You have to have organizations and people ready to go with whatever that next thing is that comes up, because you don't always know what it's going to be. So like you were saying, you know, change is not incremental, but you have to have people at the ready to fight the fight when those challenges bare their teeth again, if you will, right? Because just when you think you've killed something, sometimes it comes back. And even as I use these strange analogies, I'm pausing because it's going through my head, and I was like, oh, we got to change. I got to change the way I talk about these things. I don't want to talk about killing. But anyway, so Circle's at the ready. We're really proud to be an organization that has capacity that can step up. And that's what we have done in this case. So Circle sued the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, in 2 separate lawsuits at the Ninth Circuit with our NGO partners to address this challenge around the 401. And, with our mission, I think I said it earlier, to unite the community to protect and restore the Yuba River watershed, Circle doesn't enter into litigation lightly because it's not always the most unifying tool in the toolbox. But without successful legal action, FERC could issue hydropower licenses without critical environmental protections for more than a dozen California hydropower projects that would remain in place for the next 40 to 50 years, including most of the dams and hydropower operations in the Yuba and the Bear River watersheds. I thought it might be relevant to bring this up as a sort of case study for the importance of having engaged citizens and organizations at both the local level and the national level, like Circle and Earthjustice. And I know Earthjustice is one of the many organizations helping challenge the new 401 rules at the national level. So any thoughts on the recent rollback of Bedrock environmental laws by the Trump administration, or comments on this particular issue and how Earthjustice is approaching it?
Yeah, I mean, just, as a case study, it's one of, I referred to some of the things that you will have seen in the newspapers about what the Trump administration did, but they were so comprehensive in stripping away not only, protections on the books, but the power of states and local authorities to be able to exert the power that the Congress intended for them in our bedrock statutes like the Clean Water Act. And people power has been pretty extraordinary paired with legal action. We're starting to see long-lived fossil fuel projects like pipelines, et cetera, being successfully challenged. And I think fights like Standing Rock and Atlantic Valley Pipeline, Constitution Pipeline, which seemed unwinnable at their start, but then these pipelines were actually stopped in part through states exerting their 401 authorities to go up against what they thought was unwise federal policy by the Trump administration. So then a change was made sweepingly that's now impacting California and doing what I think should be, just very uncontroversial, crucial river protection work. So, there are lots of themes that you could pull out here, but the importance of the sort of engagement at every level. So you have folks looking at these national rules that have all these different applications around the country. And by, putting the rollbacks in play, it can slow things down. It can give arguments to local groups like Circle. And collectively, you have all of these cases playing out in various venues across the country. You get legal scholarship around it, you get political will around it, so that the litigation becomes, first and foremost, a vehicle to just stop the bad rule and restore the right of states to have some say in how wetlands and rivers and streams and our waterways are impacted, which you would think would be a states' rights kind of theme that would appeal on in conservative circles. But what we're really seeing is the hard right is abandoning those kinds of principles. But that's another conversation. But the litigation, so standing alone is important to restore protections. But it also provides a vehicle for lots of people to engage and to actually have some power and agency and control over a problem that affects them very deeply. And what the courts are now grappling with are real stories. I looked at the pleadings in the Ninth Circuit, and you get the sense of the place that's being impacted, the people who care about it and have a real stake in it. And I think that's why we're seeing such good decision in the courts. They recognize the overreach that's happened, and kind of using this case study to zoom out, we've been able to do this across the whole, from how costs and benefits are assessed under the Clean Air Act to, I'm just trying to think of all the wonky issues. I'm not going to do that because I see what the time is, but rest assured that between Earthjustice and the other great groups who do litigation I would say every single bad thing like this that has big consequences, even if it goes kind of under the radar, has been challenged. And so we preserve the opportunity both for the courts to rule in our favor, but for a new Justice Department that's has sane and moral leadership to come in and settle these cases, and or abandon the outrageous positions that the Trump administration took. And I don't say outrageous lightly. I mean, I would not be using this rhetoric earlier in my career. The last 4 years have been different in kind. We're used to litigating against the government. The positions that they have taken are truly outrageous. So, and that's a good thing, because they won't prevail, and hopefully we won't have to fight every battle to the end.
We have an opportunity to gain back some ground and hopefully make additional change. Yeah. Well, we are fast running out of time. I have one more question that I'd love to pose from the audience, and then unless you care to make any sort of closing statement or share some words, things we haven't covered, perhaps I should give you that opportunity.
I mean, you've let me talk on and on for an hour, so let's hear a question, and I'll try to say something useful quickly in response.
Oh, that's hard to do, but you can do it. What role do you see the elevation of Indigenous voices playing in protecting biodiversity and changing the trajectory of climate change?
Oh my God, that's the best question to end this on. It's everything. When I was talking about all the scientific consensus, this is no surprise, but it's also very well documented by overwhelming data that the places in the world that are best protected, still functioning, capable, competent ecosystems with integrity have been stewarded by Indigenous people. And so work on behalf of tribes and First Nations in Canada, tribes in the US, is at the heart of, to the extent that, I'll just speak for the US for a moment, but this is true across the board, the best pathway to be able to really take on the biodiversity crisis and some of the greatest leadership on stopping long-lived fossil fuel investments and shifting toward a model that will carry us in the future is being done by Indigenous leaders. And that work and Indigenous vision and sovereignty is at the heart of solving our environmental problems. And it's I'm so glad that the question was asked. It's central. And I will just, coming back to all we can say for 1 minute, Sherry Mitchell writes an incredible essay. She wrote a book called Sacred Instructions that's just like required reading, but her Indigenous Prophecy and Mother Earth is a great, short, incredibly trenchant essay on exactly this.
Well, Abbie, I am just thrilled for this conversation, and the time went by so quickly. I can't thank you enough. I want to just end with one more paraphrase quote from the book as well, which the book, in case people can't remember, is All We Can Save. And you say that in every successful effort to make change, there's always one essential ingredient: scrappy people who are willing to work backwards from goals that seem impossibly ambitious from the start. So I want to just say cheers to the scrappy people with grit and passion who work tirelessly for the earth, like you. Thank you, Abbie, for being one of the scrappy ones and for making time to chat with us and be a part of the Wild and Scenic Film Festival.
Well, and people like you, Melinda, it's really appropriate we're toasting with water.
Cheers.
Water is life. It's so wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.